Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, good day, wherever you are in the world. My name is Herb and I'm an alcoholic. Welcome to our Big Book 12-step workshop on principles. This is the concluding series of something that I started in January as an effort to have a shortened version of my commentary and experience on each of the steps, typically coordinating with the month itself, January step 1, February step 2, etc. I didn't stick exactly to that, but here we are looking at step 12. And I'm going to ask you to commit to, for the next couple hours, as long as you're going to be with us, a willingness to have an open mind and open heart. Along the lines of Einstein, those of you who know me have heard the quote many times, but it's one of those wisdom quotes that you can hear many times with benefit. The consciousness that creates the problem cannot be the consciousness that solves the problem. At 10 years of sobriety, doing all the diligent work that diligent people do in a 12-step program and more, I asked a man to take me through the steps for to go through them the third time. This was the first time with that man. I'd had 2 prior journeys through the steps. One at 5 years of sobriety, one at 7 or 8. This was my 10th year and my 3rd journey through the steps. And they were each powerful in their own way, but this, quite frankly, was the most powerful because it put me in touch with unmanageability. It put me in touch with what does unmanageability and the spiritual malady mean? What is really the implication of spiritual awakening? I'd had it unconsciously and without knowledge prior to ever being exposed to a 12-step program. By that, I mean they asked me in the hospital program in which my wife was in to be willing to stop drinking for 90 days to support her recovery. And I said I was willing, and I haven't had a drink or an inclination to a drink since then, February 21st of 1984. That clearly is a spiritual experience, spiritual awakening, but I was completely clueless that anything had happened. I'm connecting this to the 12th step. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. This is the conclusion to the series. We'll be expanding our comments on step 12, areas that are not addressed very often. And I want you to challenge yourself right here, right now. Why are you here? You've been attending regularly, and maybe it's a completion issue with you, or maybe it was the flyer that prompted you to think about spiritual sobriety and what does that mean? Or maybe it's some other reason, sponsorship direction or curiosity. The flyer indicated spiritual sobriety. It's a term I've been using for a long time. I'm challenging it myself these days. What does that mean? Spiritual. What does that mean? Sobriety in the context of spiritual. What does that mean? Why are you here? And what are your preliminary thoughts on what does that mean? I'm not asking you to answer the questions right now. I'm asking you to ask yourself the questions. In the spirit of this set-aside attitude, you have lots of information, you have lots of experience, you have whatever you have in terms of exposure to the spiritual way, the spiritual life, and many of the traditions, as well as sobriety and abstinence, perhaps a deep and broad experience with the 12 steps. But the implication of Einstein is that to the extent that we hold on to that information and experience, we're blocked from having any new information or experience. It's a prayer for spiritual intervention. It's a prayer for divine intervention. It's a prayer for God of our not understanding, whatever that means to each of us, to enter in and to open our mind and open our heart to allow us to be taken to a place that we don't even know exists. I'm not saying that that will happen. I'm just saying that that's the vision, that's the commitment, that's the attitude that I encourage each of us to have, including myself, as I enter into this discussion about spiritual sobriety. So please join me. You'll note I've changed this set-aside prayer specifically for this very workshop. God, please set aside everything that I think I know about myself, my unmanageability, my path, and you. Grant me an open mind and a new experience with myself, my unmanageability, my path, and especially you. Some of these slides that you will see, you will think, oh, I've seen that before. No, you have not. The format's the same. Some of the words are the same. But I have tweaked in a way, particularly for this very workshop today, some of the words. As you can see, I'm very consistent in talking about our way of life. Our way of life as Bill's nomenclature, his phrase for steps 10, 11, and 12. And I have unpacked step 10 and unpacked step 11 in the prior conversations, in the prior months. I've unpacked carrying the message and sponsorship. Today, I plan on talking about principles. It's going to be the total focus of my conversation. I've never given this specific focused talk or workshop before. I'm curious as to how it will go. I'm going to stop here and go back. And go back to introducing the retreat center that is administering, but also sponsoring this series. And it serves a couple purposes. For my purposes, I'm very self-centered. Of course, it's all about me. And it was to, in fact, record these comments and these PowerPoints in a series on the steps so that it could be edited and placed on YouTube and then a resource for people going forward. But one of the major wonderful fallouts of that is with the retreat center support in administering it. We also are donating all of the registration fees to the retreat center to help them be supported during this time where they've been challenged with all of the COVID regulations and the lack of attendance physically at their retreat center. So Melissa today, as usual, she's one of our pretty steady guides here, is going to introduce the retreat center. Please, Melissa.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all. I see many familiar faces, so welcome back. For those who I'm not familiar with, let me talk about the Mary and Joseph Retreat Center just briefly. We were established in 1963 by the Daughters of Mary and Joseph. We were envisioned by the late Sister Mary Ignatius, and she started this retreat center as a couples retreat center, but now we welcome all walks of life. And so that is my segue to introduce Herb. Herb Kagan has been connected to the Mary Joseph Retreat Center for many years, and he's truly part of our family. His 12-step and centering prayer groups have been extremely popular at the retreat center for decades, and now since the start of the pandemic, he has moved these popular offerings to Zoom. Herb's journey includes 7 years in Claretian Seminary, a graduate education in psychology, 40 years in human resource consulting, certification as a spiritual director, 37 years of active participation in a 12-step fellowship, and the publication of 3 books on spiritual awakening. I'm sure there's more to add to that list. So we are very delighted that he's donating the proceeds of these Zoom gatherings to our retreat center during this difficult time. So if you are in the area, please come and visit us. We are picking up momentum and our doors are open for an in-person visit. So thank you and enjoy.
Thanks, Melissa.
You're welcome.
Melissa mentioned the retreat center, even though it's owned and operated by a group of Catholic nuns, it's very ecumenical, meaning very broad in its inclusivity. They host and sponsor many events from a variety of spiritual traditions, and so it's a very all-inclusive organization. And Melissa's invitation was very sincere. If you're in the area or planning on somehow coming by the area as you visit Southern California and you want to experience the retreat center, it's 8 acres, it's half of it overlooks the ocean and half of it overlooks the city, and it's a beacon on the hill. So you would do well to come and visit. So we're going to talk about principles today. The 12th step says, practice these principles. What a great term. Bill doesn't emphasize it very much, but throughout today, I will be emphasizing that word. Oh, yes, we're talking about principles, but we're really talking about a practice. I'm actually toying with the idea and writing some meditations on that life is a practice. Really appeals to me. It takes away the any energy from guilt and shame for quote failure or mistakes. It really neutralizes it. Oh, I'm practicing. I'm just practicing. It's interesting. I've never done the research on the word sin. In my own exposure in my Catholic tradition, sin is a pretty heavy burden. And it's meant in the religious terms to be such a judgment. But I've also heard that it comes out of archery, and that sin, the word sin, in the world of archery just means missing the mark. Now that's a whole lot better from my standpoint about life. oh, I just missed the mark there. I'm going to aim better next time. That's the practice concept. And Bill comes out of step 9 in the big book, suggesting that we enter the world of the spirit. Well, obviously, that's in contrast to the world of materiality, the world of self, which we've been addressing in steps 1 through 9. That was the turning that was committed to in step 3, made a decision to turn. These are not loose words. These are profound and precise words. Made a decision to turn, and if you've gone through my workshop, you've been exposed to the thought that I can't do that. I can make the decision, but I can make the commitment, but I can't actually turn. But I can be willing to show up and take the actions and be turned. Hear the vocabulary. It's not the way the big book sounds or even writes, but it's absolutely my experience. I made the commitment in step 3. I did the work of steps 4 through 9, and I was turned. That was my experience. But we're not cured. We have a daily reprieve. Our life is unmanageable. That's the spiritual malady. That's the human condition, not the addict condition. And I pay attention to my emotions. No, that's what Bill says are the tools for us continuing on this broad highway, walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. Look at the promises on after step 5 on page 75. It's a beautiful image. It's totally comforting. It's poetic. I believe in its reality, walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. Oh, of course, it anthropomorphizes my relationship with this reality. And that's what humans do. That's why Bill used the phrase, God as we understand God. Or I use the phrase, God as I don't understand God. The meaning's the same. I'm a material being, limited and finite. This reality, whatever it is that we're attempting to name, is not material. There's no evidence. Or you have a story about it, but there's no evidence. There's no necessary feeling attached to it. Embracing these two realities is so healthy for us and so comforting and so releasing us that there is no thought and there is no feeling necessarily attached to an authentic spiritual life. But in step 2, we make a decision based on faith. And in step 3, we make a decision based on hope. That faith decision is that there is. That hope decision is, and I'm going to live my life as if it's true. And as Richard Rohr says, we make a decision without any evidence, and then eventually the evidence appears. And we continue to stay gently pressed up against this way of life. Notice the word way at the top in the capitals, I mean, in the title is all capital, that way. It's a way of principles. Principles are the core values, the operating dynamic underneath of reality. A simple example of that would be in physics, the law of gravity, the principle of gravity. Well, that's the terminology we use to describe this dynamic that we can't get our hands on it. It's like trying to grasp air, gravity. But we know that's how reality operates. Things fall to the ground. We call whatever that is that allows that gravity. And it operates uniformly throughout our world. Of course, once we get out of our world, the space travelers, the astronauts, have shown us that gravity doesn't exist out in space. It just exists within the parameters of our world, the Earth. But it's a physical law, gravity. Some people will call the principles we're talking about spiritual. I try to avoid that term because there's a lot of negativity around that. There's a lot of resistance to the whole word spiritual. But how about universal? Or how about just human? Within the boundaries of the Earth and our experience, we know that honesty is the best policy. I mean, that's a saying that we've heard since we were very young, probably. Civilizations are built around those kinds of principles. The Buddhist tradition has the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. That Eightfold Path is 8 principles guiding behavior. The Jews gave us the 10 Commandments. Oh, they sound like a burden and regulations. That's not the point. They surfaced and made visible the principles that allow society, civilization to function effectively. The Christians had the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes. I think there's 8 or 10 of them. Beatitudes. These are the principles that guide behavior. Pretty much they're all saying the same thing, using different words because of different historical sources, as well as traditions, as well as times. But all of these wisdom traditions are talking about how to live a happy human life. Now, they spin a story around it, and the stories are very different, and yet the meaning of the stories is all the same. In inventory, we take a look at our story. Oh my God, it was embarrassing. The first time I did step 4 out of the big book, I was 5 years sober. It was totally embarrassing. I was 48 years old. And I recognized that I had been living in delusion for 48 years. And that was the source of my suffering, because I was operating in contrast to principles, and they're non-negotiable and they're immutable. Those are very fancy words. Non-negotiable. That is, they're absolute. Immutable. They don't change. Gravity doesn't change. Well, outside of the Earth atmosphere it does, but in the Earth atmosphere it doesn't change wherever you are in the world. Bill invites us to a practice of consciousness in meditation, to listen to the vibration in ourselves. And I use that term differently today than I did earlier in my sobriety. I used to talk about the wee small voice in each of us, and we had to distinguish between our ego voice and the voice of the spirit. But several years ago, I came across what I consider to be a correct translation of that from the original ancient language. And it's not wee small voice. It's tiny whispering sound, which completely neutralizes thinking of listening to God audibly, but brings us deep inside ourselves and listening to whatever that vibration is. It might come from our mind, it might come from our imagination, it might come from our memory, it might come from our feelings, it might come from our sensations. There's a multitude of sources of knowing in the human being at various levels of consciousness. And meditation is that practice of listening for guidance. The big book instruction is so simple, 2.5 pages. The best and most effective explanation, a precise instruction as to how to do meditation. And yet I needed somebody to be my Rosetta Stone, to translate it. I read English. I'm reasonably intelligent and fairly well educated. I was a monk for 7 years. I read those 2.5 pages. I never really understood them until this man took me through the steps and unpacked it for me. And the key word that's not in the big book that he gave me, that was the key that unlocked meditation, was listen. We ask God to direct our thinking. That's a prayer. God, please direct my thinking. The big book suggests that we think about the 24 hours a day. The big book suggests that we consider our plans for the day. All well and good. Even that I needed to have unpacked for me to really understand the implications of it, as I've done, I believe it was last month, in a similar explanation in the Path to Freedom series about step 11. But the words that's not in the big book, that was the key that allowed me to have a daily meditation practice since 1988, is the word listen. And I listen to my thinking, and I listen to my consideration, and I listen to my feelings as the possible medium of the message. But Bill talks about step 12, and it's a very full step, 3 or 4 parts, depending on how you approach it. Having had a spiritual awakening. That's the promise of the 12-step process. Becoming aware of that about 3 or 4 years ago in a very different way. I now start my workshops and my work with individuals on the steps with step 12. So they get very clear as to why they're doing this work and what to expect. An awakening. And if you have any doubt about it, look at Appendix 2. Bill spends some time elaborating on what is an awakening and how does it differ, spiritual awakening versus spiritual experience. And he talks about the essence of step 12, which is carrying the message. What message is that? This message of awakening. And I've covered that in a sponsorship workshop that was in the spirituality series. The 3-hour unpacking of sponsorship, both my experience as well as being a sponsor, as well as being sponsored. And recently, Father Tom Weston, a Jesuit priest, and I did a workshop in the spirituality series on sponsorship. So there's lots of resources in that area. Carrying the message of awakening. But then practice these principles in all our affairs. I don't believe I've had any workshop ever that focused on that. The key to step 12, of course, is helping other people. But the key to practicing these principles is understanding, well, what does Bill mean by that? He never gave us a list of principles. I'm using the word channel here because of the St. Francis prayer, or the prayer that's designated as the prayer of St. Francis. Of course, as you probably know, he didn't write it. St. Francis lived in the 12th century, I believe, and the prayer surfaced in the 19th century. Somebody wrote it and probably captured the principles of St. Francis and called it the St. Francis prayer to give it some credibility. It's a wonderful prayer. And it's a prayer of turning, and it's a prayer of transformation, and it's a prayer of going from the darkness to the light. And we'll look at that at the end. I've changed it. I challenged everything for this particular time together, and I changed it. The key change for me was to eliminate the word eternal at the bottom. Eternal life, dying in order to awaken to eternal life. Yeah, don't like it. I eliminated the eternal part. Not one bit interested in after my death. I really seriously am not. There's nothing I can do about it. It either is or it isn't. I'll either be there or I won't. What I'm very interested in personally is my life up till that point, and your life up till that point, to reduce my suffering and to reduce yours. And that's the benefit of this process, the reduction of suffering. It doesn't mean that life is going to be a walk in the tulips, meaning easy. No. The guy who wrote The Road Less Traveled, the very first line is classic now. Life is difficult. Yep. That's right. But if you've read, and I've recommended reading, Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl, psychiatrist, medical doctor who became a psychiatrist that was in Auschwitz, wrote a book on attitude as the primary source of living life effectively. Attitude, a positive attitude. The only one thing I have any real influence over, think the Serenity Prayer. I don't have any control over anything, outside, inside. I have no control, but I have influence. And he said very wonderfully, the key to life and happiness, I believe, is that attitude. I can choose an attitude of positivity. I can choose an attitude. Do I have a sense of well-being today as you're here listening and thinking and perhaps hopefully praying that set aside or holding that set aside attitude? Today, with whatever sobriety and work that you've done, do you have a life of contentment and well-being? These are not trick questions. They're essential questions, because if you don't have a life of contentment and well-being, a sense of it, perhaps it's available to you. That third step process is captured by me in the use of the way I use my arms. I have free will, and reality is reality, and it's in a flow. And when I use my free will to implement my willfulness, my self-centeredness, my selfishness, usually I'm going against the principles of reality. Reality here is a synonym for life. Reality here is a synonym for principles. Reality here is a synonym for God with a capital R. I don't need to use the word God. I don't need to use the word spiritual. I don't need to use the word divine. I use them and I'm comfortable with them. But let's talk about life and its flow. How does the acorn become the oak tree? There's a organismic life force. I was reading something this morning, a new book somebody gave me. And she is a rabbi, and she talked about the love force. Oh my God, I've never put those two words together. I've used life force, the force, like Star Wars, but I've never used the word. So I'm toying with that now for the next several months, probably, as I read her book. The love force, powerful. And when I'm in alignment with reality as it flows, reality just unfolds. It's not personal, it's evolution. It's geology and biology and psychology and sociology, all these studies of organisms and human behavior. They're just looking for what are the dynamics, what are the patterns, what are the predictables. If you haven't read Ken Wilber, I really recommend his theory of everything. He's a genius. And he's read almost any substantial book in any area that's ever been produced. And I'm being really expansive on that because I think it's really true. And now he has a theory of everything, how it all works. We can understand biology and psychology and theology and education and sociology and economics. And he organizes it all. I'm a very organized person, and I love those kinds of structural explanations of reality. It really helps me develop the lens through which I look at reality. And the whole key here, and the word's not in the big book, alignment, but it's my interpretation of step 3. A decision for a relationship. That word is not, those words are not in the big book. Although Bill implies them on pages 62 and 63. When you look at the suggestion models that he uses, there's 5 different relationships. So I just make it very visible by saying step 3 is a decision for a relationship with that which we made a decision about in step 2. Step 2 is just a faith decision. Step 3 is putting that faith decision into action, a commitment to do steps 4 through 9. What's the purpose of that? We lose the forest for the trees. We get so myopic in our view. Step back a minute, take a breath, and take a look at this entire panoramic vision. What are we doing here in a 12-step program? Why are we embracing the 12? Why are we going through all this work of doing these steps? Well, because we want to remove in us the obstacles in us to the light that is in us, to dissipate the darkness that is in us. Willingness and grace. Step 2, page 47, Bill says, willingness is the cornerstone. The only thing that is really necessary is a willingness. Not a belief, a willingness. But the man who took me through the steps coined another phrase for me. He might have picked it up someplace else, but I'd never heard it before or since from anybody but him. Willingness without action is fantasy. That was not good news, and that was not a compliment to me by him. I was balking at doing some of the steps, claiming that I was willing, and he said, yes, I know you're willing, Herb, but willingness without action is fantasy. He was holding me accountable for action, not my thoughts, not my feelings, not my knowledge, not my emotions, not my opinions, certainly. He was holding me accountable for my actions, because that's all that really counts. In the final analysis, that's all that really counts. Our way is to be in alignment with reality. The whole point of step 10 is to identify when I'm not in alignment. The whole point of step 11 is to discern and get guidance about alignment. The whole point of step 12, the manifestation of alignment, is organic. We will want to and will be actually helping somebody. I'm not talking about program on fellowship or anything along that line, or anything very sophisticated. That's why I'm using the term help. And I consistently use that. I've dropped the word service, or at least I intend to, for the last 20 years, at least. When in meditation, the wee small voice in me, that tiny whispering sound, said, service is just too sophisticated, Herb. Replace it with the word help, because it has earth in it. It has dirt in it. Humas, the root word of humility. It will keep you grounded. It will keep you with a sense of healthy perspective. You're not the light. You're the lantern. My wee small voice, that tiny whispering sound, is quite articulate and quite confrontive, and sometimes gets quite loud. Practice these principles. Bill articulates the principles in chapter 8 to the wives. Today we would talk about to the special relationship, to the committed relationship. The family afterwards, chapter 9. To the employer, chapter 10. A vision for you. Now, that's a very poetic term Bill uses, a vision for you. But when you read the chapter in the 12 and 12, in the big book, it really is about practicing principles in your fellowship and in your community. In other words, your entire universe. I challenge you, actually, invite you, is probably a better word, to read those 4 chapters, looking for the principles that Bill articulates there, making a note. Oh, there's a principle, and what that is. Bill never gave us a list of principles, even though he suggested in step 12, we practice these principles in all our affairs. I don't know of any list that he gave us. Many people since then have given us lists. And the list that I'm going to show you in a minute was built on those giants, on the shoulders of those giants on which I stand. But I challenged every one of those lists and the words in the lists, and I challenged my own list that I've had for the last 30 years. Every year I re-challenge it based on my current consciousness. Last year at this time when I was preparing for the 2021 workshops, I actually changed my approach to step 10, the principles that come out of step 10. I'll talk more about that in a minute. Because I have a new level of consciousness and experience. I'm not saying that anything I'm doing or saying is correct in the sense of objective, but it is my consciousness, it is my experience, it is my knowledge now at this present moment. I don't hold on to it. I don't hold on to it. I'm not attached to it. And if somebody comes with a better word or a better definition or a better experience by my standards, I will incorporate that in some way. This is from the Way of Life document. This is the current list. I haven't changed it for 2022. I have reviewed it. I don't believe I've changed any aspect of it. It's not official. I'm happy to have conversations with anybody who takes a look at it and asks me if I would consider something as a different word or a different description. but I try to be complete because these are sources of meditation for me. I can take, like, for instance, step one, those numbers are referring to steps. And I can take a look at honesty and the description of it there, facing and accepting the facts, the objective truth about reality. Conduct comes from some dictionaries. Conduct is fair and straightforward, means uprightness of character or action. Honesty implies a refusal to lie, steal, or deceive in any way. Well, especially to myself. I didn't know that I didn't know. I wasn't lying or even rationalizing in any conscious way. But at age 48, I saw that my whole life, up to that point, even 4 years sober, was built on many, many, many lies to myself and others. So the action, and this comes from the big book, page 30, is to concede my powerlessness. My powerlessness to my innermost self to concede, to surrender and admit defeat. Admit, of course, is in the step itself. Surrender is not in the big book. That term is not in the big book. So you can see I've used a conglomeration of words from different areas in the big book and or from my experience to articulate what do I mean by the principle of honesty. My own sponsor made it really simple when he said, I want you to call me every day. I said, why would I do that? He said, because I want you to learn how to be accountable. I said, well, why would I do that? He says, because rigorous honesty is the key to recovery. On page 58, Bill talks about that. He spends almost the entire page talking about various levels of honesty. People who can't be honest because they're biologically incapable. He spends several sentences on that. Very misunderstood by most people. It's a biological obstacle, meaning that they might be psychopath or retarded in some way or sociopath in some way. Constitutionally incapable. By their very constitution, they do not have the capacity. But then he says, emotional and mental disorders, you have a real chance if you're willing to make an effort at honesty. That sponsor said, honesty is transparency. Well, that didn't help me very much. And I said, well, what does that mean? He said, it means your insides and your outsides match. Bam! I did not know what I know today, the implications of that. If you want to know what your principles are, do an inventory of your behavior. How do you behave? Your feet tell you what your principles are. If you're robbing banks, you're a bank robber. If you're telling lies, you're a liar. There are no white lies. There are more serious and more minor lies, but it's lying. Infidelity. Well, I was just flirting and having fun. No. On a gradient of 1 through 10, we're talking about the Richter scale here. It might not be really very powerful obstacle in your spiritual and emotional stability. It might be a 1 or 2, but it doesn't take much to slip into becoming an 8 or 9 on the Richter scale. I was reading a psychiatrist, and he was saying about just human behavior and mental health. He's saying he says, the corruption in our thinking and our behavior begins with the first compromise of principle. The Art of Loving. That's the book, The Art of Loving by, it'll come back to me. One of my favorite authors.
Eric Fromm.
Eric Fromm, of course, yes. Eric Fromm. I believe that's F-R-O-M-M. And it was in one of his other books, but that's the main book that I would recommend, The Art of Loving. And he said, our corruption, our human corruption begins with the first compromise of our principles. Well, you've heard it differently in the meetings, I'm sure, that the drink is not the relapse, it's the evidence of the relapse. The relapse absolutely happened the day before, or the week before, or the month before, or the year before. The relapse meaning that you held a resentment that wasn't worked through. You held a fear that wasn't disclosed. You held some dishonesty or secret that you didn't talk about. Oh, it was no big deal. You let it slide. And yet, that's the slippery slope. And so this is a summary of those very complicated, or at least explanatory principles. Staying with the same list on the left-hand side, the actual principle of each of the steps as I've interpreted it. Step 10, I changed to vigilance, because Bill says in the big book, watch for, and the synonym for that would be vigilance. And then from the 12 and 12, I take out the word spot check, because it really helps me understand the tool of the 10th step. It's a spot check inventory. It's not to be done at night or done in writing. People can do that, who cares? But let's really understand the spirit of the tool. Step 10 is a tool. When I'm disturbed on the spot, I become undisturbed because I realign myself. The whole point of the process beginning in step 1 is that I have no choice, and yet I have free will. But in step 2, Bill clarifies for us that what he means by free will and the proper use of the will. Page 53, God is or God isn't. What is your choice? We don't create God, but we create our concept of God. And as I've mentioned earlier, we make a decision to have a relationship, to turn from our self-centeredness, which is the unmanageability, to other-centeredness, which is the spiritual dynamic, the turning to be in relationship with other with a capital O and others with a small o. We list the obstacles in step 4 and we confess them in step 5, and we list our inclinations. That's a very key word here to understand character defects. Character defects are not the behavior. Character defects are the inclinations to the behavior. I was able, thanks to steps 6 and 7 at 5 years of sobriety and going through the work, to stop the behavior of infidelity, but the inclination lasted for 2 more years. Those of you who have heard me share on that know that step 7 was transformative to me, because it expanded what the words are in the big book and the 12 and 12. The words in the big book and the 12 and 12 are all about prayer because we're powerless. Good as far as it goes, but for me, it didn't go far enough. And the man said, now I want you to talk to me every day about what you're doing and what you're praying about. And I saw that accountability was the key to the power of step 7. Pray certainly because I'm powerless. That's really easy to do. And no, it wasn't, but it became easy to do. Specifically, that was the key also, not generally. But then to talk about my failure and then to accept that I'm in practice on a daily basis to this man, and then finally weekly, and then finally monthly as it began to subside on the Richter scale from a 9 to a 1 and eventually disappeared after 2 years. The inclination has never come back. And in step 8, making that list of harms. It's not about our behavior, as I've hammered home if you've been around me at all. Step 8 is not about your behavior, it's about the harms of your behavior to others. And step 9 is a commitment to change that behavior and to repair the damage. It's a twofold knockout punch. Step 11, as I mentioned, to listen to the direction that we do receive if we're willing to listen. Different people do different ways of meditating, whether you're walking, gardening, grooming your dog, or crocheting, or sitting quietly in the lotus position. It doesn't make any difference. What is the difference is listening. I'll be very practical. What allows you to listen to the internal sounds with the total point and focus of altruism? That's the word I've chosen as the synonym for unconditional love, for helping, for service. Altruism is a synonym for me. Look it up. It's a powerful word. It sounds a little fancy, but it's not. Doing something for somebody else with no possible benefit to yourself. Knowing that, of course, underneath, there is a tremendous benefit to yourself. It's just not the dominant motive, or at least you're willing to have it not the dominant motive. I hope you're hearing these modifications. They're not throwaway lines. Helping others. Not necessarily in the program, not necessarily in a 12-step environment, but having the lens through which you look in your life 24/7. How can I help? Walking on the street, if there's something that you can do, maybe to pick up a little trash that's just floating around and obnoxious. It's your neighborhood, it's your life, it's where you live. Who's responsible? Who's responsible? Many again have seen this chart. I've changed it. 12 steps, the program. Meetings are not the program. Meetings are very important, but they're a throwaway line in the big book. We meet weekly so newcomers can bring their problems. Many of us meet regularly in people's homes for the fellowship that we crave. Those are the lines, but it's not part of the program of recovery. It's the outcome of the program of recovery. The program, notice D is in italics. That's encased in the big book. The man who took me through the steps called it a textbook. I have come to really believe and embrace it as a textbook. And it's so dense and accurate that it keeps being unpacked as I read it myself and or read it with you. I learn every year new words, new nuances that I didn't have before because my consciousness has improved. Those 12 steps, a precise process. It's a methodology for human beings to deal with their unmanageability, which is the human problem. Unmanageability, we call it a spiritual malady. It could be called the human malady. Selfishness, self-centeredness is how we're wired. Of course, we need prayer. We need prayer. We need help. Prayer is just asking for it. Doesn't necessarily mean the traditional spirit or divine kind of connotation. It just means that we're aware that there is a power, a life force or a love force in the universe. Dr. Berger calls it the organismic life force that brings the acorn to the oak tree. When you're dealing with people who have any resistance to religion and or connotations of religion. Bill suggested it in the 12 and 12, in step 2. Use the group. The group itself has something that you don't have, sobriety. The group itself has something that you don't have, happiness and joy. The group itself has something that we don't have, freedom. Not all groups and not all people in the group, you know that, but you get the spirit of it. I go to meetings so that I can be helpful or be helped depending on the circumstances, but it's about taking action. It's not thinking about it. It's not praying about it. It's not feeling it. It's actually taking action, moving my feet to bring a reduction in suffering or an increase in joy to the world around us. As you know, sponsor is my most favorite moving part, because if in fact you have a consistent relationship with an experienced person, you'll do all the other moving parts. Becoming a lantern. This is what step 11 is all about. Lighting the path for others. This is what step 12 is all about. Becoming a lantern. Lighting the path. This is our way of life. Bill summarized it so beautifully. You've heard me say it perhaps in the past. I forget exactly the page that it's on. Probably in A Vision for You. We keep our head in the clouds, step 11, and we keep our feet on the ground, step 12. It's about being very practical. A head in the clouds, of course, is step 11, a reference to that that's tied, of course, into step 10, because Bill in the 12 and 12 makes the comment that inventory and meditation are hand in glove. Of course, we have to keep the channel clear of obstacles if, in fact, we're going to have a channel that flows with life. And then that channel will become stagnant unless it has a flow from my heart through my feet. Happiness is an interesting subject. In the last 20 years, there's been a plethora of books written and studies done on happiness. Dennis Prager, in a recorded series of talks on happiness, said something that got my attention about 25 years ago. Anybody who wants to be happy, that's their goal, will never be happy. Because happiness is not a product, it's a byproduct. It's intriguing. Happiness is not a product, it's a byproduct. Well, it's a byproduct of what, Dennis? It's a byproduct of my relationship with a meaning broader than myself and a contribution of service to the people around me. Well, he's not in a 12-step program. I wasn't doing the steps effectively for the first time back in that period of time when I was listening to this. So I related that to steps 11 and 12, having a relationship with a meaning broader than myself, a power. You don't need to use the word God, but a power with a capital P. That gives me a sense of context and meaning for my life. It's my story. I make it up. I adopt it and I live as if it's true without any evidence. And then 33 years later, I look back over my life. I still don't know whether it's true or not, but it has worked. I'm very practical. And a contribution to the people around me reminds me then of step 12, of course. My commitment is to improve my consciousness. Those of you who have been around me in this last year know how I have really begun to emphasize that word consciousness. I think it's the one key word for us as human beings. In fact, I wrote a meditation on it. God is consciousness. And we are unconscious as human beings. We're asleep, dreaming that we're awake. One of the philosophers said, Gurdjieff, a Russian 19th century. All human beings are asleep, but dreaming that they're awake. Freud picked it up and said, the work of the human being is to convert their unconsciousness to consciousness. Otherwise, they conclude, as unconscious people, they conclude that they're a victim of circumstance or the malevolence of other people, the ill will of other people. The work of the human being is to make the unconscious conscious so that we take responsibility for our life. Have you heard that before? You certainly have if you've been listening to me. The total outcome of the 12-step process is to take responsibility for your life and to take responsibility that the life I have today is in fact the life I created. Oh my God, is that painful and embarrassing. The life I have today, every aspect of it. Oh, there were circumstances and people and events in my life that created what I have today, absolutely. But it wasn't the circumstances and the people and the events. It was my reaction to them. And if you've done a 4th column resentment inventory with me, you're painfully aware of the truth of that. I don't have a part in my resentments. Is that relief? No. That's a gasp. I don't have a part in my resentments. I have 100%. I own it 100% because it's my reaction. And it has nothing to do with people and circumstances and events. To improve my consciousness. Perhaps, and the suggestions from all the literature, from the psychologists, the sociologists, and the spiritual tradition people, I read over 10 books on happiness. Every one of them included as one of the positive actions that you can take is to have a gratitude list, because it reorients you to growth in positivity. It's a choice. Viktor Frankl. You can be negative or you can be positive. Bill Wilson, you are at the fork in the road. You can go down the road of darkness or you can go down the road of light. It's our choice. It's black and white. It's our choice. We have free will. And he captures it, Bill, on page 53, God or no God. We don't have a choice over our addiction. We don't have a choice over our unmanageability. We have a choice, God or no God. Power or no power, life or no life. Amazing. Now I approach it creatively, this suggestion for gratitude list, you've heard it many times, the suggestion, but I'm fine-tuning it and making it very practical, not burdensome. Have a gratitude list and each day add something to it. But the rule is you can never repeat what's already on the list. Well, you can intuitively see that there's going to be a challenge here. After 30 or 60 days, you're going to have to pause for a minute and say, well, what am I grateful for today? I've got 60 things I've already mentioned. And the rule is that I can't put anything that I've got on the list already on the list. I have to put something new on the list. And boy, I'm going to have to stretch. Well, I was able to have a good night's sleep. That might not have been on the list. Or today I'm very happy about the sunshine in my life. Or whatever. Yeah, we need to. And you know what? When we stretch like that, and we're creative like that, and we're looking for something positive, guess what happens? We form a positive outlook on life. We form or reform our lenses through which we look. We grind those lenses, or we replace them, of course, and that's what the step 4 actually does. We get a new pair of glasses. Prayer is so important, but it's so misunderstood. Prayer doesn't change God. Well, at least this is my take on it. Because whatever that reality God is, it can't change. It just is what it is, and it's always been that way, and it always will be that way. That's the inherent nature, theologically, of this reality. It's not about philosophy or theology or about opinion. This is inherent in the concept, which we can't put adequately into words. But whatever it is, it can't change. It can't come and go. It can't reward and punish. It can't smile and cry. Those are all human qualities. Whatever this is, it's got no connection to human, other than we make up the story. It created us, and therefore we're pretty much a mirror image of it. That's what the Genesis says in the Hebrew scripture, the Torah. God made humans in God's image and likeness. God made them male and female. It's a very, very intriguing passage. God made humans in God's image and likeness. Humans comes from the word humus, the root word of humility. The definition in Latin is earth or dirt. God made humans from earth or dirt. Humility is the perspective that I'm not unique as a person. I am unique as Herb, but I'm not unique as a person. There are 7 billion of us. There's a lot of redundancy in this world today. Prayer doesn't change God, but it changes me. In the same way that the gratitude list changes my outlook, the prayer changes my consciousness. It expands it. I don't know how it works in any other way. I mean, I'm very confident it does. I don't need to speculate on that. Meditation is different than prayer. Prayer is our talking to God. Meditation is our listening to God. Why are we listening to this tiny whispering sound? For guidance. That comes right out of the Oxford group. It's not in the big book. Although the step itself says we pray for knowledge of God's will, translation, guidance, and the power to carry that out, because we all know that we have an experience in our history when we look back over our shoulder of knowing better and not doing better. Oh my God. It was so embarrassing. I knew better and I didn't do better. And then I also saw that I didn't even know better. And I didn't know that I didn't know. You see, there's that level of acceptance of my powerlessness and my humanity and my limitations. Humility, a sense of perspective. Not about humiliation, although humiliation does generate some humility. But it's not about humiliation. It's about a healthy perspective of reality. It just is. Don't take it personal. Reality is not personal. The principles of reality are not personal. One of the principles of reality And it's been validated by all the studies that I read that have been done by Harvard and the University of Pennsylvania. Seligman is the author of positive psychology in the 90s that led to the Harvard Institute on Happiness in the early 2000s. These are psychologists, these are sociologists, these are scientists that are looking at human development. And they're all concluding that human nature requires structurally that we have a behavior of acts of loving kindness. My words, Buddhist words, actually. There's a book by Rami Shapiro. He's a Jewish rabbi that has embraced Buddhism and is in a 12-step program. Yeah, I mean, he's self-proclaimed that he's in an eating disorder program, I think OA. He's got it all going. Read his book, Loving Kindness. You won't learn anything new probably if you're a big book person and a step worker, but you will put new words to and have new experiences based on his experiences. Helping, acts of loving kindness. It's about action, not about thoughts or feelings, although all of that's wonderful, it leads to actions, but even the actions lead to loving kindness. The biggest component of this process, of this daily practice. Notice at the top, practices in all caps. Not a perfect deal. No. I show up every day, wounded by my incompetence of yesterday, embarrassed even sometimes by it. And yet, okay, today I'm going to do better. That's all. I'm just going to do better. I'm not going to achieve my vision and my, no. I'm going to just do incrementally a little bit better. And I've been having that thought for 32, 33 years, and I believe it's manifesting. To have accountability for the commitments. If you're not talking to somebody on a daily or weekly or monthly basis, it all depends on you, on the frequency and the relationship you had with your accountability partner. I talk to my daughters at least once a week. And it's not a formal accountability relationship, but we've all agreed, they're both in program, one Al-Anon for 30 years, one AA in 30 years, that we want to have a transparent relationship. And I have a colleague that I talk to probably once a week, Dr. Alan Berger, and we have the same, a transparent relationship. And formally, I have a sponsor that I talk to about once a month. And formally, I have a spiritual director that I meet with for an hour once every 2 to 3 months, because I'm committed to transparency. I'm committed to using, I used a hacksaw and an axe in the beginning, 1988, to do my inventory. My God, I was rough-hewn. Now I use fine sandpaper. It's gotten a lot better, but I still need the sandpaper for the bumps. And I still need the commitment to keep me conscious and moving forward. Spirituality is a relationship. Bill has it codified in the circle and the triangle. The circle is an ancient symbol for the divine having no beginning and no end. The triangle is an ancient symbol. Bill used it to represent the steps and the traditions and the concepts. Al-Anon picked it up and they put the circle in the center of the triangle, which I thought was brilliant adaptation of the AA symbol. They reversed it. The AA symbol is the circle with the triangle in the middle. The triangle representing the human being also, as I've interpreted it, body, mind, and will. But the Al-Anon have reversed it, and they put the circle inside the triangle. As you've heard me maybe comment on it with these $100 words: transcendence, the outer circle, and immanence, the inner circle. All a mechanism to try to understand human development. It's about a relationship. Trust God. G-O-D is capitalized all the way through here. I don't know what it is. I've made a decision that it is. And I live my life as if that's true. I still don't know. But I don't care. Because it works. Clean house. That's that inventory of step 4. I had to do it more than once. Some people only do it once and then they live rigorously in 10, 11, and 12. Clearly, I don't live rigorously in 10, 11, and 12. So I've had to do it periodically over the years. A step 4. But inventory is huge in the 12-step process because Bill gets us in step 10 to do a personal inventory rather than the step 4 moral inventory. And the personal inventory in step 10 is not just a daily, it's a spot check. So during the day, it might be more than once that we are disturbed and need to be undisturbed. And then if in fact we got sloppy with that during the day, just before we go to bed at night, he has in step 11 another inventory. How did we do today and how are we going to want to do tomorrow? A gentle inventory, again, not in writing, but it is at night. And it's a reflection, it's a meditation as part of step 11. It's the first instruction, in fact, in step 11, upon retiring at night. Then he has a series of questions. I don't ask myself formally those questions, but I've had a practice of formally asking those questions, and now I've absorbed them into a way of looking at my day. So my lenses are lenses that filter out what were the darknesses in the day that I need to address tonight and or tomorrow. And then helping others, as I mentioned. Not just in the program, but 24/7, my scanning of the horizon outside of me is where can I contribute? I love that word, where can I contribute? This is our way of life. Bill says, this is our way of life, a way of living. That's one of the reasons I like the Buddhist philosophy and the Buddhist approach and the mechanisms of it. They talk about our way of life, and I put here as a change, our way of living, because it's not theoretical. It's a very action-oriented. This is the way my feet move. This is the way we're invited to have our feet move. Our feet reveal to us what we believe. Am I powerless or not? If I'm not praying and meditating, I don't believe it for a minute. Or perhaps I don't believe that there is a power. Or perhaps I don't believe the power cares. Or perhaps I don't believe that the power is available to me. I mean, there's lots of variations on that theme, as you've heard probably many times from either your sponsor, your meetings, and or from my workshops.
Hi, thank you so much. Thank you again, and thank you. You are a gift to me. And anyway, I got on right from the beginning, and the set aside prayer was there. You are, wow, thank you. That's all I can keep saying is thank you.
Yeah.
God is good, and I appreciate my brother because he turned me on to you, you know, and what a gift. And, you know, I thought it's another trip. They just want money, right? You know, it's like when I first came to AA, How much is it going to cost? You know, everything has to have that monetary value to be of value. No,
Well, that's the
no.
genius. That's the genius of Bill and the 12-step program and the traditions. That's the genius of it. And Rockefeller was able to see that in the beginning when Bill asked for money. Rockefeller knew this was a really, really, really going to be a powerful program, but he said money would spoil it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Herb. Thank you.
You're
God
welcome.
bless you, and
You're welcome.
God bless me for hearing you.
Well, yes, 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 all of that. It gave me a life. All right. It not just saved my life, because I know that's true, but it gave me a life. What I was looking for, I eventually found, and that's the freedom and then the joy of living. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I also know that this methodology brings that to everybody who embraces it. Not perfectly, but everybody who embraces it and makes an effort, they begin to have their life turn around. I know that. And that's why I cannot not do this.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And yeah, thank
you.
you. All right. Bye.
I pulled out my way of life document when that page on principles came up.
Yeah, good.
And it's the first time I have actually looked at it
Sure.
closely.
Yeah.
And I noticed that every single principle had an action that has to be taken.
Well, no, not has to be, but is suggested.
Yes. However, we know how I'm struggling to go from the head to the feet.
Yeah.
And so the fact that there was an action there was kind of like,
Oh, all right. Yeah.
so it isn't just a principle, it means I have to do something. And the more I hear that I need to choose to do something, I think the more likely that I will actually choose to do something.
Yeah, especially since it's helpful to know that the action and the specificity of the action, it enables you to be more practical about doing it. That is correct.
Yeah. So I was glad and not glad to look
Sure.
at that more in depth, because I also was glad for the slap in the face, rehearing that the life I am living is the life I created.
Yes, I take a risk on saying it that way because that it is intended to wake people up, and it is intended to be that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Very effective. I am so blessed spending time with you on Saturday mornings. Thank you so much, Herb.
I have a question, and I'm not sure there's an answer. This concept of helping others
Yes.
and altruism, selfless service, for which I can't receive any benefit or won't receive any benefit. How do I reconcile that concept with my knowledge that every time that I help somebody else out, I'm helped more in return?
Yeah.
And I remember as a child, like preteen, I grew up in a Christian household that had missionaries. We didn't have missionaries, but they sent missionaries.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember as maybe 8 or 9 years old, arguing or having a discussion with other kids in the same church saying, well, they do that because they're going to receive the benefit themselves from helping others.
Yeah.
And I still have that same paradox today.
Yes, and it is a paradox, and you see, when we begin to think about it, then we see the truth of it underneath that it's really is about me. And it says you can't keep it unless you give it away. It's built right into that saying even. It's kind of like, and yet, okay, so I know that I know now, and I know that this is good for me, that's not my, well, I want it not to be my primary motivator. I'm aware that this is in my best interest. I am aware of that, but it's not where I come from. At least I'm very conscious that what I do helps people reduce their suffering. And from my standpoint, in my awareness, that's the primary. Then when I sit quietly, I know I'm feeling so good and my life is so good, probably because of what I do. So, it's kind of like I'm in acceptance of the mixed motives, if you will. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. It's probably a knot. There's a term, Gordian knot. It's a knot that cannot be untied. It's just like, okay, yeah. It's kind of like my concern about my narcissism, because I get an awful lot of wonderful feedback from the work that I do. And is that feeding me in an unhealthy way? It has that potential. But my spiritual director said, yeah, it probably has the potential. Herb, pay attention, be accountable, but never let your fear or concern get in the way of your ministry, because you're helping people. And then he quoted, and you've heard me say it, God writes straight with crooked lines. Yeah, and I just love it. It's kind of like there's that compassion, that wear that garment loosely. Yeah.
Thank you.
So today, what really struck me greatly was when you said, I am no longer interested in eternal life.
Yeah.
And that is the coolest thing. All of a sudden I got free with your saying that.
Oh, nice.
And that
it's the first time I've ever said it that way. Yeah.
Oh no, I know it's not. But it's the first time I heard it. And then the other thing is that I'm interested in my life now until it ends. And I've never heard people talk that way before. Right. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, it puts a nice perspective on it. No, this is important today. I really do want to be happy today. All right. But now I know, and it's been confirmed by science, that happiness is not going to come to me unless I do some things about my attitude and my actions. So AA really does stand for attitude and action. Yeah.
Herb, just thank you. Heartfelt gratitude. I don't think there's any accident that our paths crossed about 8 years ago, and going back to the workshop in Culver City at that time. And my question to you is a personal question. Did you have, before you got into the ministry, before you became a priest, did you have any inclination in your sense of what you wanted to do in your life as to where it has evolved to where it is today?
Oh, I was so clueless. What I knew is I wanted to be a priest, and I wanted to be a missionary priest. And I know now that what I really wanted was to wear the robe and the white collar so that people would respect me. And I would be a professional, and I would be the apple of my mother's eye, because she was a daily Catholic. All right. I did not know that at 17. But after I did this work at age 48 and looked back on that and did a very clear inventory, including doing some work with therapy, I was able to unpack all of the stuff that had created that. But isn't it interesting that I was drawn to become a priest and a missionary for very bad reasons, very, very corrupt motives. And now I am a priest and a missionary, carrying a message of transformation and conversion. To the heathens, by the way. Exactly. I mean, I hope it's not offensive to somebody, but I get a big chuckle out of the way that my life has turned out. I desired to be it, and now I have become it, but in a completely way that was never anticipated.
action again, another message of action.
Well,
I just to let you know, I'm hearing you.
yeah. Well, one of the wise old timers said action is the magic word. Yeah. Action is the magic word. And the big book supports that. It doesn't matter what you think, it doesn't matter how you feel. It does matter what you do. And if you have wisdom in your groups or in your sponsors, that's what they say. We don't care how you think. We don't care what you know. We don't care how you feel. We don't care what you want. All of that's nice, but irrelevant. We have some suggestions for your doing, for your action. And if you take the actions, your thinking and knowing and your feeling and emotions will all change. Yeah. And now it's science, of course. Dan Siegel, Siegel, is a psychiatrist, medical doctor trained in psychiatry, scientist at UCLA. And his books are wonderful. One of them I would recommend, Mindsight, not Insight, Mindsight. And he talks about actually confirming in terms of his brain studies that knowledge does not change the brain. Feelings do not change the brain. What changes the brain is when you take action. It creates new neuronal synapses at the ends of the brain or in the brain, new neuronal synapses that wire together. And he made the comment, synapses that fire together, wire together, and create new habitual neuronal paths so that we are actually organically changing our brain. 15, 20 years ago, we did not know that. We thought the brain was never going to organically change other than deteriorate. Now we know that it actually changes. It's a very live organism. And the way you change your brain is by changing your actions. Now, I'm so glad that you said that, because that's a very powerful piece in the whole conversation about principles. And your comment about the action, that's the component connected to the principle. I didn't have some principles. I had many that I didn't operate on, but I didn't have some principles. And I made a decision to adopt those principles and to take the indicated actions of those principles. Now I have those principles. They were built into me by my actions, not by my thinking or reading or feeling. Now, it was a really wonderful question or response on your part, Nancy. Thank you for pressing that button in me.
Hi, Herb. Thank you for that prompt. I was like, yeah, I know it's in there and I just got to get it out.
There you go.
I'm so grateful to be here with everybody. And I've been following you on YouTube, Herb. And yeah, the whole unmanageability piece. Wow. It's just mind blowing.
It is.
Spiritual malady.
It is. I want to endorse that. It's the best kept secret in the rooms, unmanageability. What is it? How does it work? And how do you deal with it?
Absolutely.
Yep.
It was right underneath my nose and I just kept missing it.
Of course.
It really was.
Yeah.
The question that I have, so in terms of my experience in the 12 steps, it has been with both OA, Overeaters Anonymous, and then more recently, Al-Anon. And so I appreciate the dance, and I'm going to use some of Richard Rohr's terminology, the dance of action, but also for me as someone who identifies as an Al-Anon, the need for inaction. Or maybe the surrendering. And so sometimes it feels like a paradox for me. Can you speak to that, or should I add more? Or
well, you're welcome to add more. I mean, even the name of his organization, Richard Rohr, he has a retreat center in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and it's the Center for Action and Contemplation. Yeah, so he encompasses in the title of his organization those two things, action and inaction. Now, contemplation is hardly inaction, but by normal standards, it's like doing nothing, staying silent, being in the presence of God. But of course, that's not what we're doing there, but that's a subject for another day. So, but I've never thought of it that way for the Al-Anon. Of course, my daughter, who is in Al-Anon, said, Dad, your problem is drinking. My problem is thinking. And I always translate that into compulsive activity, not action. She makes a distinction between action, which is effective, and activity, which is an addiction.
Yeah, it's just something to not think about.
Well, no, think about it certainly, but work the steps around it and you will penetrate through the robotic nature of some of the thoughts and the feelings and the actions, and you will get to a level of the spirit and the energy of the spirit and the consciousness of it, so that we will be able to manage it. My daily practice today is balance. Whoop, whoop, whoop. And I'm trying to maintain this balance like this, you know?
Yeah.
I am going to be 74 in February, and I feel like my brain is just the anxiety that I get with the computer world and not remembering
Okay,
things.
so you're asking a question.
You
and
think
that
it's
is,
too much?
should I add Tuesday night? Well, first of all, I don't know whether it's too much, but that's a conversation with your sponsor. I'm assuming you do have a sponsor.
Yes, I do.
And
Food
here-
addict one.
but here's the purpose of Tuesday night is to go through the steps out of the big book. Have you ever done that?
Yes.
How long ago?
About a year and a half ago.
Oh, fresh. Yeah. You're welcome to come and kick the tires to see if it's something that fits in with your schedule and your needs. But my suggestion is that you really focus on a daily practice of 10, 11, and 12, rather than going through the steps again.
Okay, yeah. Sort through. That's what the food addict sponsor says.
Okay.
Is that I need, they call it quiet time. And that's been my struggle, is sitting down and being quiet for 1/2 hour.
Oh, wait.
What?
There's a misnomer. Quiet time is a wonderful term if you understand what it means in the FA program. Do you have the brochure that describes quiet time?
Yeah.
Have you read it?
What, too long ago when I first
Read it.
came, I don't even know
Read
what it
it.
says.
Read
Yeah.
it. It talks about meditation, and it's a wonderful description of quiet time as a practice of meditation. It's not being quiet. It's about being in conversation with God.
Right. That's what she tells me,
All right.
you know, for me to hear it.
But she sounds like she's wonderfully wise. Follow
Yeah.
direction. But
Okay.
don't assume you know what she's saying.
Right. I don't think I do, you know. I don't think I do. How she
Right.
emphasizes, you know, right now I've lost 60 pounds, or I've released 60 pounds, you
Sure.
know, and I've maintained and blah, blah, but I'm starting my old,
No, but you said I'm 46 years sober and I have anxiety.
right.
No, there's something amiss here.
Yes.
Yeah. And so take direction from your sponsor and make your quiet time very robust. Understand what it is and begin doing it. It will change your life.
I need it.
We all do.
Yeah.
I have a feeling my question has been answered, but I'm just going to say it anyway. That, you know, I'm devoted to this program and to the steps, and I guess I need to improve my contact and faith in God, because I'm feeling a little depressed, mainly because of my 23-year-old son. Smokes weed, vapes. I'm not going to go on and on, but I feel bad for him. And
Yeah.
I feel sad, and he's a good person, and I know he's on his path, and it's a marathon, and I have I'm powerless over him,
Right.
and he's living at home.
I was going to ask, does he live at home?
Yeah.
And so you're although you are powerless, and he's marginal as an adult at 23, quite frankly, he's still quite young.
Very.
But you need to address and confront, at what point
Right.
do you help him become an adult?
We've been trying to do that with the coaching by his therapist and by my therapist.
Great.
Exactly that. But it's really hard. And
Yes, it is hard. Are you going to Al-Anon?
I'm probably going to go again.
So the answer was no, but it's a good idea. Yes, it's a good idea, and get a sponsor who has an experience with dealing with helping their fledglings fly from the nest.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a hard age. Mhm.
It is. And he's got ADHD, and he's, got some processing issue,
I do. Yeah.
So it's,
there's not a simple or easy answer, but there is an answer.
I like that idea. I like answers.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're in the pursuit. You said he's got a therapist, you've got a therapist, you're in dialogue. He has ADD. You already know that. He knows that. I'm assuming that somehow he is or you are helping him deal with that. It's real. You don't just know that you have ADD and go, okay, I can manage this. No, it's that catch-22. How do you manage it? Well, either through therapy or through medication, or a combination of both. But it needs to be addressed.
Right. And now that he's 23, even though he's like a 20-year-old or a 19-year-old, and you hear these stories, and I can't control whether he takes his ADD medication.
No, but you can make sure that there are consequences if he doesn't. You're in charge of the consequences because it's your home.
Right. That's the thing. Right. Right. It's my home. It's our home. Yeah.
But you have to learn from Al-Anon.
Right.
What's the balance of, what does it call it? The iron fist in a velvet glove.
Right. Right. The term his therapist used. Yeah. 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 Oh boy.
Yes. Yeah. This conversation is very healthy, but it's not going to resolve it.
Right. Right. I'm glad I got to say it. It always, I learned in program, to share.
That's right.
At the level, the painful, truthful level. And it may not feel better at the moment, but it leads towards more healing and more solution.
It takes the power out of it, and it connects you to reality and the potential of other people. But you're definitely in process of a solution. And it might be 5 years of helping him deal with it. And then you have to kind of come to grips with, what are you willing to do, and what are you responsible to do, and what are you not responsible to do? And that's a discernment. There's no formula here.
I appreciate that. I really do.
Yeah. Yeah. Love him, but be firm.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. God bless you.
Thank you.
You introduced me to Rami Shapiro,
Yes.
and as a result of that, just over the last month, I've been reading 5 of his books. And this book actually is introduced by your buddy Richard Rohr, and it's called Recovery: the Sacred Art, the 12 Steps of Spiritual Practice. And I read on Kindle, and everything that I highlight can be exported into Word documents. So I just had 4 brief things just from his preface, which I think are really words of comfort, and go along with our conversation today in relation to our powerlessness and our inability to help ourselves out of the unmanageability of our life. So the first one is Rabbi Shapiro says, the fiercest grace is that whatever addiction brought you to rock bottom that opened the door to spiritual awakening.
Nice. Nice. Yeah.
And the second one, if you're addicted to anything, and all of us are addicted to the delusion, we are in control of our life.
Yes.
And we often don't come to the spiritual ground until we've hit rock bottom and have tasted the medicine of heartbreak.
Yes.
And the last, and sorry for taking so much time.
Oh, no. This is
Yeah.
all part of it. It's wonderful.
Here's the heart of 12-step recovery. Quit playing God.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in fact, that's right out of the big book, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah. First we have to quit playing God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And it's on the surface of it, it's kind of like, well, of course. I mean, that's silly. And yet, when I did a fourth step, it revealed to me that indeed, even though I didn't know it and I didn't feel it, I was acting that way. I was acting as if I was the center of the universe, that I was the source of my power, and that God was irrelevant. It doesn't matter what I thought or felt. Again, I looked at my feet and my behavior, and inventory revealed that to me. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I know personally, I mean, how often am I disappointed, upset, because I want to change things from how they are
Right.
to how I want them to be.
Yeah. And there's nothing
Always.
There's nothing wrong with wanting to improve other people and or yourself, as long as you have a perspective about the reality of the role and the responsibility. Yeah. Mhm.
I just wanted to respond to your last call
Yeah.
and just to say that I love to hold the lantern up. I love doing step 12. I don't have any fear that it is an obsession or that I'm doing it to make myself look good.
Yes.
Very often I found that people will come on the path, we share the path, I hold the light, they keep moving. Sometimes our paths stay together, and sometimes I don't hear from them again for months or years,
Right.
but they always come back and say that that one little piece of light got them onto the next step. And then when I feel a sense of darkness, I feel that too, that the person who holds the light up for me, maybe 10 years ago or anytime, that will help. It isn't about the here and now always, but it's about the path. I just love that.
Well, it's so important. It's so important that we remember and have that in our consciousness, that we may never know the impact of our holding the lantern and shining the light. We may never know. We may know, and we may know, as you say, from somebody right now or 10 years from now, but it doesn't matter. Trust that it's so. Trust that it is so. And whether we get feedback or not, and how often we get it, we need to be, as you and Roger pointed out, we need to be, well, that's our goal, to be detached from it to the extent that we can be. Yeah. So let's pray the prayer of St. Francis, but translate it and given a whole new setup. I call it becoming and being, those two sides that we talked about. Becoming that action and being that silent relationship with power, with being itself, being the lantern. The light shines through us. I'm not the light, but I am the lantern. Stand by the path. Allowing the light to shine on the path so others can walk the path, as Shauna just mentioned. We'll never know what strangers pass under the light and through the light. Now I've changed it so that it's not so much a prayer as it is a acknowledgement. Spirit of the universe, underlying the totality of all reality. Make me a channel of your peace. But where there is hatred, I may bring love. That where there is wrong, I may bring the spirit of forgiveness. That where there is discord, I may bring harmony. That where there is error, I may bring truth. That where there is doubt, I may bring faith. That where there is despair, I may bring hope. that where there are shadows, I may bring light, that where there is sadness, I may bring joy. Please grant that I may seek rather to comfort than to be comforted, to understand than to be understood, to love than to be loved. For it is by forgetting that one finds. It is by forgiving that one is forgiven. It is by dying that one awakens to life. I'm going to repeat it because it's a change. It's an essential change in the prayer of St. Francis. I've eliminated the term eternal. It is by dying that one awakens. This 12-step process, it's about the dying of the false self, like the caterpillar in the chrysalis is dying and emerges as the monarch butterfly. That's the transformation. It is by dying that one awakens. And that's the invitation of the 12th step, having had a spiritual awakening. We don't even need the term spiritual. I mean, I'm not discarding it, but I am saying, try it. Having had an awakening as the result of these steps, we awaken to our life. I am the one I am waiting for. Nobody's coming. Nobody's coming. I am the one I am waiting for to live my life to its fullest. Amen. Thanks, everybody.